and welcome to the Ecomodernist channel live. I'm Carl Pauls. I'm here with our friends Chris Bergen, Gabriel Ignetti, and our special guest, Dr. Charles Forsberg. He's here to speak with us about cellulosic hydrocarbon biofuels. Dr. Forsberg is a nuclear chemical engineer and principal research scientist at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He teaches classes there in nuclear chemical engineering and waste management. He's one of three co-inventors of the fluoride salt-cooled high-temperature reactor, along with other advances in the field of energy development. He's published over 300 papers and is co-inventor on 13 patents. Welcome to the program, Dr. Forsberg.
Well, thank you very, very much. As he mentioned, subject today is cellulosic hydrocarbon biofuels replacing crude oil. I should probably mention I grew up in southern Minnesota. I've got a whole bunch of cousins and uncles who actually farm land. My dad was a farm manager, and so I'm also very familiar with the agricultural sector. I've sort of got a education by osmosis, for the lack of a better term. I make the statement, which I think chemical engineers would agree with, but probably nobody else. If oil had never existed, we would have invented and manufactured liquid hydrocarbons, that is, gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, because of their extraordinary capabilities. So if oil never existed, I think we'd still have these materials. Liquid hydrocarbons are made from crude oil, natural gas, coal, and biomass to meet lots of human needs. Mostly today it's crude oil because it's the easy one to do, but hydrocarbons have a lot of wonderful characteristics. First, of course, they are a third of the global energy demand, but it's easy to transport energy to the customer. It's really cheap to move gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. They're energy dense, which is why we use them in airplanes. They also serve the general and very important feature of energy storage. You may have noticed we have a higher energy demand in winter than in summer. It is mostly met by storing hydrocarbons in tanks and underground facilities, provide that additional heat, electricity, when we need it, when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. And in the US, we need about 6 million weeks of energy consumption. That's about 3 million gigawatt hours. And if you did this with batteries, it would cost you only several $100 trillion. So looks like a good option. It's also a feedstock to the chemical industry. And my general thesis is that it's faster and likely much more expensive to make liquid hydrocarbons from alternative feedstocks than inventing and refining replacement technologies for gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. This may be the fast, quick, cheap route. I said 3 million gigawatt hours, and my guess is there may be one person or two people on this broadcast who have a clue of what a gigawatt hour is. But to give me a feel, we need about 3 million gigawatt hours in storage for the seasonal and other energy demands. If you go to a gasoline station, they have 1 or 2 gigawatt hours of energy stored in the gasoline and diesel in all the tanks underground. And if you look at Grand Coulee Dam, the largest dam in the United States, it can store 20,000 gigawatt hours per year. But we need several million gigawatt hours of storage. So that gives you a feeling of the storage problem, which liquid fuels primarily addresses. Now, there are 3 non-fossil feedstocks to produce hydrocarbons if we don't wish to increase atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. The first are plant products. This is the stuff we eat. Sugar, starch, vegetable oils. It's used for food. Unfortunately, there's insufficient feedstock. The second type of feedstock is cellulosic biomass. This is most of the biomass on the planet Earth's leaves, stalks, grass, wood, kelp, cellulose, or I should say celery, which is probably the only form of cellulose that we actually eat. Now, let me give you a concrete example. Let's take a look at a corn plant. It's a picture of a corn plant. If you haven't seen it, it covers the whole Midwest where I grew up. It has corn grain. That's the stuff you eat. And then you have cellulosic biomass. That's the leaves and the corn stalks. And the interesting thing about this is that as corn yields go up, corn stalks go up because you need more corn stalks to support the corn. So Increases in agricultural productivity imply one-to-one increases in cellulosic biomass, which we now just leave on the ground. The third option is take carbon dioxide out of the air or other sources. This is a complicated slide, and I apologize for it. Feedstock this deals with feedstock supplies and economics is driving the system to liquid hydrocarbon fuels. The first carbon source we can use to make, if it's a hydrocarbon, we need carbon. We can make starch, sugar, and plant oils. Doesn't need a lot of hydrogen. The primary cost is the biomass. The problem is the availability of these materials to make liquid fuels. And it's a competition with food and other applications. The second biomass source is cellulosic biomass. That's essentially everything else. And cellulose is a molecule, contains about one oxygen per carbon. Hydrocarbons contain no oxygen, and so if you're going to turn cellulosic biomass into jet fuel, we got to remove the oxygen. And the easiest way to do that is add hydrogen. It takes about 2 hydrogen atoms per carbon atom. You extract the hydrogen, comes out as water, and we have a hydrocarbon fuel. The third way we could make jet fuel or gasoline is take carbon dioxide, what are called electric fuels, take the CO2 out of the air, the ocean, whatever it is. The problem with that, which is technically viable, there's no question you can do it, is it takes 6 hydrogen atoms per carbon atom because you got to strip off all that oxygen. And so my personal perspective is that converting carbon dioxide into jet fuel or gasoline is not likely to happen because I need a lot of additional hydrogen to pull the oxygen away. You add lots of hydrogen, you add a little bit of heat, and you produce gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. These are liquid fuels. You burn them, the carbon dioxide goes back to the atmosphere, and new plants grow and grabs this carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So we have a complete carbon cycle. We start with cellulosic biomass, local depots, refinery, burn fuel, CO2 back to the carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere, and back to cellulosic biomass. So it's a round trip. Now, there's a little catch here. There always is. Cellulosic hydrocarbon biofuels can replace all crude oil if you have massive external energy hydrogen inputs for the conversion process. And on the right, I show what the basic equation is, chemical equations that start with cellulosic biomass. It's got carbon and oxygen. Add hydrogen to a lot of chemical processing, which yields liquid hydrocarbons, gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, plus water. But there's a very important caveat. There's insufficient biomass if we use the biomass carbon, some of the biomass carbon, to remove the oxygen as carbon dioxide. There's insufficient biomass if we use some of the cellulosic biomass to make hydrogen to run this system. And there's insufficient biomass if we use biomass as the energy source to run the refinery, the chemical plant. And so these are all losses in the chemical processing. So the key to making sure we have sufficient feedstock is we have to get external sources of heat and hydrogen. And if you do that, you've got plenty of feedstock to replace all the world's crude oil. But that's the caveat. You can't use biomass for everything else. Now, the hydrogen removes oxygen from cellulosic biomass, producing liquid hydrocarbon fuels. For those of you who remember high school chemistry, the top equation tells you what's going on. It turns out that the U.S. current crude oil production is 69 million barrels per year. That is going to go down because of hybrid electric vehicles and other applications. We looked at 5 cases of cellulosic biomass to jet fuel. And the middle case, we produce 5,900 million barrels of liquid hydrocarbons, and we need a little over 100 million tons of hydrogen per year. Now, if you use the traditional natural gas to hydrogen process, you would consume about half the natural gas consumption in the United States. You could also use nuclear, wind, and solar to produce hydrogen. Now, that sounds like a lot, but remember, crude oil currently provides about 40 to 45% of our total energy demand. So what we're talking about is replacing the big monster of an energy source, and that If you use hydrogen from natural gas, it's going to take a little bit of natural gas. Same thing if you use nuclear or wind or whatever the lowest cost source of hydrogen is. We need large biorefineries. We have 100 years of building refineries and chemical plants, and the bottom line is the only ones that are economic are the large ones. Economics of scale. The other thing about refineries is they produce variable product slate over the year. More gasoline in summer, more home heating oil in winter. We need that. But there's a catch. The economic shipping distance for low density biomass is 40 to 70 miles. And so we need local depots like grain elevators to convert the low density biomass, cellulosic biomass, into a shippable commodity that we can ship to the refinery. So we have this intermediate step in the rural areas that ships an intermediate product to the big refineries, which will look from the outside about 80% of them will be identical to what is in a modern crude oil refinery. We're not talking about changing the refineries very much. And here we show the depot. We have the local density stuff. We ship it locally to our depot. And the depot does a couple of things. Some nutrients are recycled to carbon back to the soil. It consolidates some commodity to ship to the biorefinery. And it produces a lot of secondary products in many cases. And let me use an example, and I apologize that most of our audience probably doesn't understand this, but the product I'm using is alfalfa. It's an interesting plant in the sense that the leaves are really good animal food and the stems are not very nutritious. So if you had a depot and you had alfalfa coming in the front end, you might separate out the leaves and send it back to the cows and turn the stems, which are not so nutritious, consolidate them and send it to the biorefinery. So this depot does other things than just consolidate stuff. Now, I'm going to use one example of a depot option. There are a whole bunch of them. We can take cellulosic biomass, we can heat it up in a real hurry, 2 seconds or so. And if we do that, about 70% of the biomass ends up as bio oil. The way to describe bio oil is it's a really bad, low-grade crude oil. That's the only way to describe it. But, but like any other crude oil, you can go ship it to the refinery. About 15% ends up as char. This looks more like charcoal. The thing that's important about char is it also contains all the potassium and phosphorus and potash, all those things that the plants need as nutrients. And we want to put that back on the soil as a fertilizer. It also turns out that the char, which is a form of carbon, is very good at improving long-term soil productivity. So it's a great idea in terms of agriculture. This gets back to soil sustainability, which is an absolute requirement. And then we get a bunch of gases and we burn the gases to run the whole process. And there are a bunch of pilot plants that are currently doing this. We recycle nutrients in carbon char. And this is long-term improvement of soils. Food production, if you think about it, removes soil nutrients with no built-in recycle loop. You know, when you haul all that food to the city, the potassium and the phosphorus that you need to survive is no longer in the soil. And but if I'm making biofuels, I don't want phosphorus and potassium in my gasoline. It's going to mess up the car or my jet engine. I only want the carbon and the hydrogen. So what I want to do is recycle that back to the soil. The second thing this does is this refractory carbon improves long-term soil productivity. Now, the funny thing is that we actually have about 1,000 years of history on this. It turns out some Amazon tribes back about 1,000 years ago used to burn wood and throw the ash and the char in particular areas where they grew gardens, and the gardens were much more productive than growing stuff on tropical soils. And it turns out that this carbon that they threw on the ground, is still there today. So it's a form of carbon sequestration where we only have 1,000 years of experience. Admittedly, they're a little check, but that's a separate issue. We need large biorefineries. That just converts the gasoline, diesel, and jet into chemical plants. And realistically, in this kind of scenario, most of these biorefineries will be modifications of the existing refinery industry. So for the oil industry, we get out of oil production, but we keep the refineries and the downstream stuff. And we have massive hydrogen inputs. We can make it from natural gas, sequester the carbon dioxide. We can take nuclear plus water to equal hydrogen and oxygen. We can take wind, solar, and water and hydrogen and oxygen. And the choices we'll choose depends on what's most economic in a particular location. But the point I wish to make here is that we have 100 years of chemical engineering and refineries, and you just got to have scale. It's just got to be big. It doesn't economically work as a backyard industry. Well, this will obviously increase farm income and may significantly increase food production for crops such as corn, which is a little bit surprising. Let me go through the logic. Corn yields in the last century have gone from 25 bushels to 180 bushels per acre. But on test plots, some people have gotten over 600 bushels an acre. That's a lot of corn. Now, corn and corn stover, that is, the cellulosic leaves and stalk yields increase at the same rate. They have to. Let's imagine if we go from 25 bushels to 160 bushels and we kept the same corn stalks. Well, the 160 bushels of corn would crush the corn stalks if they were designed for 25 bushels an acre. So there's a one-to-one correlation. Third, which most people outside of the Midwest do not realize, is the farmers in the fall spray the ground to accelerate with a bug spray to accelerate decay of the corn stover. And that's because if you don't do this, you get so much corn stover, so much corn leaves and stalks that it reduces yields for the following year. Now, however, if we paid for stover, we would remove a fraction of that stover and boost the yields the next year. Last, farmers may also add inputs if paid for corn. And so the case of corn, we're at 180 bushels an acre. If we pay for corn stover, will we hit 300 bushels an acre? I don't know. It will clearly go up. I've had no question it will hit 225. But the assumption, the belief system that biofuels and food are contradictory goals is not correct if you think about how to do it right. And that's the important thing. This is the story I'm telling you is a half a story of chemical engineering, half the story is agriculture. And we seem to have a lot of experts in agriculture and a lot of people in bioenergy, not very many talking to each other, but very, very important. Let's take a more parochial point of view. The U.S. is a world leader in only 5 industries: weapons, finance, software, agriculture, and oil and gas. And this option builds upon 2 of those strengths, the agricultural industry and the oil and gas. And I would say if you want to make progress in a hurry, you should build on your strengths, not on your weaknesses. Could I have the next slide? Building on U.S. strengths obviously means a much faster transition. We're asking them to change their feedstock from crude oil to cellulosic biomass, convert a lot of natural gas to hydrogen to supply industry, front-end changes to the refineries, no changes to the downstream. That's all fine for agriculture, upgrade version of farm local elevator and the market system. And of course, we may have increased farm income by 25%, which I'm sure nobody in rural America is going to complain about. But that's building on strengths. Now, where we stand today, the most recent one is DG Fuels is commercializing one variant of this option. We'll see if those plants actually get built. It's a little early in the game. Cellulosic biomass to hydrocarbon fuels, massive external hydrogen heat inputs. Up to 97% of the carbon biomass ends up as liquid fuels. And this being a large industry, it's $5 billion per plant. It's economics of scale. And 2 plants have been announced. And I'm not going to obviously go through that flow sheet. If you're a chemical engineer, you'd say Fischer-Tropsch, a nice 1920s technology. If you're not a chemical engineer, you've never heard of Fischer and you've never heard of Tropsch. Next slide. In short, the cellulosic hydrocarbon meets all the requirements. Sufficient feedstock with external energy and hydrogen. The depots to enable shipping biomass feedstocks to large, efficient biorefineries, And last, which I think is something that just gets ignored in most bioenergy discussions, is the recycle of soil nutrients and carbon char for soil sustainability. Uh, we have a real bias in this country of ignoring long-term issues, and I would put maintaining soil sustainability is far more important than climate change. We can keep farming with changing climates, but you do need very good soil. And I don't know if there may be a conclusion slide there. I don't know if there's one after this or not. No, we could go back one. But that's the quick story. We can replace crude oil and keep with gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. And the reason why is it's going to be really hard to find alternatives for those extraordinary chemical mixtures. Uh, but we do have to do some changes in the feedstock. And this looks like the competing option at the scale required. So that's the summary picture. Again, feedstock sustainability depots and maintaining soil sustainability for the next 1,000 years.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that presentation. We probably have just a few questions. So the first question that I have is, what are we in the opportunity cost of efficiencies here? We're not competing with food, which is great. We are producing hydrogen in order to build up this feedstock with a hydrogen to replace the oxygen. And the alternative to that would be cracking water and combining it with CO2 from the air. And so, what's the opportunity cost to select the cellulosic product instead of air or CO2 from the water?
The answer is very simple. It takes 3 times as much hydrogen to convert carbon dioxide into gasoline, diesel, or jet fuel than it does cellulosic biomass. And hydrogen is the most expensive component of this entire process. And so my answer as a chemical engineer is he's told me it's going to cost 3 times as much feedstock of hydrogen. That's automatically not that's not a winning option. Uh, by the way, we did look at this option, but we looked at it for a very special application where money was not an objection.
Mm.
We looked at it creating a nuclear tanker to produce jet fuel from carbon dioxide from seawater, water from seawater, and produce jet fuel for the Navy. So you have a nuclear powered tanker that makes jet fuel and follows the carriers around and the cruisers and other support ships, and essentially a refueler that doesn't have to go into port.
So, the answer, I suppose, is that hydrogen from or biofuel from seawater makes enormous sense if you are in if you're on an alien planet that doesn't have
Yes.
any growing biomass, if you're
Or,
at
or, or,
war.
or if you happen to have a carrier task force
Yeah.
where 95% of the
Yeah.
logistics is hauling fuel to the carrier task force.
But in the middle of Europe, America, Asia,
Yes.
where you are growing enormous amounts of
Yes.
food to feed 8 billion people,
Yeah.
you have the feedstock there. You have the
Yes.
cellulosic mass.
Now, obviously, the big winners are the United States, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, Central Africa, and the Russians, because those countries own more biomass than anybody else. Europe has some, but it doesn't compare to what Russia's got.
Go ahead, Chris.
There we go. Yeah, I've got, I think, several questions, but I'll just mention I grew up in Northeast Iowa, not far from you grew up, Dr. Forsberg. So uh,
I got
several of
relatives in that area.
yeah, yep, several of my mom's family were involved in farming, but I was more of a town kid. But I'd hear them talk a little bit every once in a while, so a vague familiarity with agriculture. But one thing that concerns me, uh, about a third of the corn grown in Iowa, my understanding, goes for biofuels, and there's subsidies for that. Will you need a bunch of subsidies to make this work, and for how long? That's my question.
There's a more fundamental question here.
Okay.
Uh, the price of crude oil in the last decade has gone from about $35 a barrel to about $125 a barrel, roughly. That's the range. And it's clear the cellulosic biomass will take over biomass, will take over crude oil above $100 a barrel. It can't compete clearly when you get below $60 a barrel. If you
Yeah.
put any restrictions on crude oil and you get the price up to the $70, $80 amount, then you've got a self-sustaining industry without subsidies. But you can't compete with $50 a barrel crude oil. So, and the issue for all of the biofuels is not when you have high crude oil prices. The issue is when you have $35 a barrel crude oil. And so there's a problem here. If you want to get off of crude oil, either for national strategic reasons or for climate reasons, what do you do to get the effective price of crude oil up to $70 a barrel? And that's the issue. I've proposed myself that perhaps we should have a subsidy for cellulosic biomass that only shows up when the price of crude oil goes below $70 a barrel.
Mhm.
So pick some number like that, because the issue is if you're gonna get off of crude oil, your problem is you start reducing the demand for crude oil becomes cheaper, and you're not going to get there. So that's the policy decision. And as I say, what I would recommend is a minimum price. If the price of crude oil goes below, let's say 70, pick some number, then you get into some subsidies to make up the effective difference between the two. If it's above that, no.
Mhm.
It's
Okay. And
create an incentive that covers the crashes. There are very few industries where you see this factor of 4 or 5 variation in the raw materials cost. That does not happen. Automobile prices do not go up and down by a factor of 5.
yeah, and do you feel that the cellulosic feedstock would be pretty constant, not subject to droughts and floods, which would destroy the product and therefore upset your financial model?
One of the important when you speak of drought, two things should be important to recognize here. In many cases, you have bad events like droughts and the rest, and the cellulosic biomass goes down a lot less. What the plant does is the plant says, first priority is green leaves. Then if I've got enough left over, I make corn. So
Absolutely.
variation in cellulosic biomass is much less than the variation in the final product corn. The second one, which has to do with the depots, we do not have generally a large-scale droughts that cover the entire of the U.S. We have lots of droughts that cover particular parts of the country. When you have a depot and a shippable commodity like bio oil, you partly get around this problem because if one part of the country is not producing bio oil, another part of the country that has cellulosic facilities will be producing bio oil. So having a shippable commodity from a local agricultural area to a distant refinery is the biggest insurance effect against what I call bad weather.
Okay.
I think Gabe has a question.
Yeah, you hear me? Okay. How clean does this burn?
No different than gasoline, diesel, or jet fuel because we're making the same product.
Okay. Same, exactly the same.
Or is it cleaner like other synthetics?
It depends on what you specify.
Mhm.
This just tell me what you specify, and we'll make the Fischer-Tropsch process. Use an example of the Fischer-Tropsch process. You tell me what you want to make, we'll make it. So it can be as clean or as dirty as is legally allowed.
Okay.
By the way, I should mention something about Fischer-Tropsch. This is probably politically incorrect. It as an aviation fuel, it's the first jet aviation fuel in the history of mankind. And the reason why, of course, is the Germans were losing the war, didn't have any jet fuel for their jet fighters, and that was Fischer-Tropsch.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about radical innovation here, folks. That was only 80 years ago. Since then, a lot of countries use these processes to make crude oil from different feedstocks. There's some on biomass. There's a big bunch of plants that start with natural gas and produce jet fuel and gasoline and diesel.
I'm wondering.
It will be very low sulfur. The sulfur content will be zilch.
That's pretty important. In the current state of these, the stalks, the corn stalks that are left there to rot, this is itself a pretty. It's not possibly not significant, but it is a non-zero impact on the environment as it is today. It is producing decay products, methane. It's not sequestering that carbon. Is there in the popularity of things like a carbon tax, is there something that is going to make cellulosic fiber hydrocarbons net
Well,
positive?
it will certainly reduce the methane and other releases from the decay of biomass. Whether you can get credit for it is a separate issue. But what is noteworthy, particularly in the case of corn, is that it turns out corn stalks and leaves are getting in the way of production.
Really?
And most people do not appreciate that. And
You got
so
to get
we
rid
put
of
on
them.
this special bug spray in the fall that you pay for to accelerate the decay of corn stalks. At least we do in Iowa and southern Minnesota. I cannot say that for the entire Corn Belt because I only have relatives in Iowa and southern Minnesota that do this.
It's pretty amazing that I know that there's going to be a lot of people who want to compare the heat added or the heat input to this and compare it to, well, can't you just charge an electric vehicle? That, of course, is going to beg the question of producing the battery, et cetera. But if we're going to compare it to something like charging an electric vehicle, which is north of 90% efficient, what is the opportunity cost of diverting that heat? Is it require very high quality heat from an advanced reactor? Could it be done with sort of the wet commodity heat produced by a light water reactor? What's the characteristic of this? And are we like doing something like steam bypass, which would take away power from the grid in order to achieve this process?
The refineries will have their own power plants. I don't think a modern refinery right now consumes about 10% of the crude oil going into just to operate it. And a biorefinery is going to have hydrogen, so it's going to be much bigger fraction. The question you have in electric cars is it doesn't deal with a storage problem. You can store. We have a 3-month supply of crude oil and refined products that deals with winter, summer, storms, and the rest. And the problem with the all-electric scenario is they have no solution to that problem. You end up with a month of storms and clouds and no wind, and you're in deep, deep trouble. And we don't have a fix.
Yeah.
We have coal piles, we have natural gas and underground storage, and we have tanks of oil and gas. And I'm very pessimistic about an all-electric society because of the storage problem. I think in the end, that's the remarkable feature of these liquid fuels. They're really cheap to store. And we're going to end up using a lot of them. I know there are a lot of all-electric advocates, but the issue is how do you deal with storage, not just on a good day, but on a bad day? Yeah. I think the entire fleet will go to hybrids. I have no doubt about that. I just have a question of what fraction of the car fleet is going to end up as all electric.
Yeah. BYD in China, they've really advanced EVs. I mean, they say they could charge faster than it takes to gas up a car. So, I mean, I might be wrong, but it seems that is the future. But would the future of energy in that regard be maybe long haul trucking and air flights?
Well, those are the ones where you can't get out of it at all. But the problem is you get a cold day with cloudy weather in a northern climate, and Suddenly your electric demand is all heating houses, your car battery efficiency gone through the floor, and you've got a problem. And until we figure out something a lot cheaper, at least it has to be one order of magnitude less expensive than electric batteries for energy storage, we got a problem. So I
Even
don't,
for EVs, even for
I,
EV.
I don't think you're going to make it there. Uh, we will go to hybrids. Of course, the long haul truck and the airplane, they are not going to go electric. And the reason very why is that both of those vehicles, an extra pound of weight in batteries means 1 pound less in cargo. And that's
No,
the
yeah,
catch.
obviously, yeah.
And if you want to go across the Atlantic, you still have an Atlantic when you've run out of charge.
Yeah,
It,
In
well,
your
I would think that the future there would be nuclear ships, just nuclear
Oh,
power.
for ships, that will clearly be the case,
Mhm.
especially the big container ships and
Yeah,
the big stuff.
maybe even the small ones. We were talking about that last week, I believe. Yeah.
Wonderful. I think I've long been an advocate for biofuel, but cellulosic biofuel just makes the case even better. It
Mm,
is perhaps the requirement of adding heat and electricity, but we have that in supply with nuclear
Yep.
energy. So it makes a lot of sense. It makes sense to conserve our hydrogen feedstock, which is very expensive. It is very difficult to source that, and so it makes a lot of sense here. Chris, go
yes.
ahead.
Yeah, I was glad to hear in your presentation that there'll be like some fertilizer returned to the soil
It's a
during
requirement. It's not an
the
option.
process.
If you're
Right,
thinking 1,000 years.
Mm.
right. That was one of my initial questions before you reached that point in your presentation. But are the are these cooperatives and places that are going to process this initially for further shipping, are they already doing much of this, or is this going to require a build out locally of
There's limited amounts of
facilities?
this being done for forest waste in some parts of the world,
Hmm.
where people are doing something like this in British Columbia and Finland. It does require a build out. But one of the things that recognize in the Midwest is we have something called grain elevators
Hmm.
and systems that consolidate grain, corn, and soybeans from many farmers into big central storage facilities that is then shipped very long distances around the world. So we have the basic structure of what we require. This requires that these elevators end up doing a little add some processing facilities to what they currently have. But the basic structure of the food collection system, corn and soybeans, is the same structure we need. It's just that the elevators ultimately have to get into more chemical processing for the corn stover in addition to the corn.
Hmm. And is there it's going to mean a lot of shipping of the stover as well, which currently they aren't really doing. Is there how much is that going to affect, say, the tractor supply companies, how they need to change how their machinery operates?
Well, there've been prototype stover harvesting machines around for at least a decade. John Deere
Okay.
will love this. They will absolutely smile at you. I
After
mean,
they've already downsized like 5 times in the past decade. How about soybeans? When soybeans are harvested, I see the huge clouds of dust when soybeans are harvested, which I assume most of that is cellulose. Are you thinking about soybean harvesting as well?
we have not looked at soybeans as much simply because corn is the big crop, so that's where the emphasis
Hmm.
is. By the way, I should mention the we in this case. Most of the is mostly myself and a fellow by the name of Bruce Dale, who for many years ran the big biofuels program at Michigan State University.
Okay.
You've got to have a real agricultural expert if you're going to work in this area for any length of time, and he's
Right.
my go-to source.
Wonderful. Well, if we've run through all of our questions, thank you so much for the presentation, Dr. Charles Forsberg. This has been the Ecomodernist channel live. You can find us right here on YouTube at Ecomodernist1 is our handle. The Ecomodernist channel is the name. You can find us online at esna.earth. That's ESNA.earth. You can also find us on Facebook at the Ecomodernist Society of North America, and on my personal channels where I rebroadcast many different places, Soyaddle on Twitch, soyaddle.tv, Carl Alex Pauls on LinkedIn, and on x.com. You can also donate to us on Patreon. Look for the Ecomodernist channel on patreon.com. Remember, emissions first, peace and justice will follow.
Please subscribe to us on YouTube, Ecomodernist channel. Also to subscribe to us on Twitter and Facebook, Ecomodernist Society of North America.
And online at https://esna.earth.